was going to say good morning, everyone, but I just said it was noon. So I'm going to say good afternoon, everyone. We are so glad you're here today. My name is Lori Zimmerman. I'm the Director of Professional Learning with MASA. We are excited to have a session from some of our human resources experts in one of our business partner organizations, CESO, with us today. Laura Iden is here and Krista Zerbies is here. Laura and Krista, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and what you do, but I'm going to say thank you for reaching out and asking us some questions about the people data that we are collecting or not and facilitating the conversation with us today. If you're joining us and are able to turn your cameras on, we'd love to see your faces. It's always easier to speak to people than it is screens. But we also know that you might be in the middle of something. So if you're able, great. If not, we understand. Hi, Randy. Laura and Krista, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Lori. As Lori said, Krista and I are joining you from the Center for Effective School Operations. So we are a consulting firm out of Northeast Minneapolis that supports school districts and other organizations that support schools with their operations, generally all the wraparound operational support that we can. So in the areas of facilities, communication, technology, HR, finance, and transportation. We have experts in all of those areas, and we're partnering right now, at least on the HR side, with over 35 clients across the state, and then we're also across the country as well. So we learn from our clients and really developed this informational session based on what we're learning from you and what we know is really important. A really important function of HR that is often missed in schools. My background, again, my name is Laura. I have always had a background in education. I originally started as a classroom teacher in a Spanish immersion, 2 different Spanish immersion buildings, moved into instructional coaching, administration, and then have also dabbled in student teacher supervision, love working with brand new teachers, and have been at CESO almost a year and a half now. And I oversee and support all of our HR clients and all of our consultants that support our clients. So this is a passion of mine, is just supporting teachers, supporting anyone who works in buildings, not just teachers, so that our kids get what they need. And I'm going to turn it over to Krista to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
All right, thanks, Laura, and hi, everyone. Like Laura said, my name is Krista Zerbies, and my official title is VP of CESO HR Consulting Practice. Really, I help to tag team the running of our HR division together with Laura, focus specifically on the way that we work with clients and the resources that we provide. My background is in human resources. I was in school district HR for 9 years before coming over to CESO just about 2 years ago. And during that time, got the chance to experience HR across the full spectrum of the function, everything from hiring to benefits administration to leaves to helping out with negotiations and investigations and workers' comp. Really anything that HR touches, I got a chance to be a part of in some way, shape, or form. And I'm really passionate in particular about being able to do human resources differently, in a way that isn't just seeing HR as the compliance police, or the people that are just there to tell you no when you want to do something. But it's really thinking about how could we support our employees differently so we can actually engage with our employees on a human level, which really just changes the way that then they're able to work with their students and their families. So really passionate about that. And when it comes to people data, or what we call people data, I care a lot about it because I was a history major by trade before I ever got into human resources. So have spent a lot of time just in the space of research and answering the questions, what do I know and how do I know it? And one of the main ways that I get to know that is through data. So this is a subject that I care very deeply about, which is why I'm actually really happy to be able to get a chance to talk with you all today.
Great. So we've done our own introductions, and then just to set the stage as where we're headed today, understanding your people data, we're going to really talk about it. What is it? We're hoping that people who have signed up for this session, whether you're watching live or in a recorded version, have some interest in understanding what we mean when we say people data. So we will be defining what our definition of this is. Why does it matter that we organizationally understand our people data? And then where do I start? So if you're in a place where wondering, okay, so what? And I understand the importance of it, but also giving you some tools to get started. And we'll give you kind of a framework to do so. So just to start our thinking today, we have been, so at CESO HR, we've developed, actually in all of our operational areas, we've developed assessments. And the assessment is a baseline. It's a tool to kind of assess your current reality and then really look at process design, structures, what's working, what's not, what might need to be improved as a department. So as specifically around HR, we've developed this assessment that encompasses 6 different areas. The areas are onboarding, taking care of your people, which is sort of where we're going to start today a little bit. Also around process design and documentation, contracts, labor relations. Let me just see here, proactive practices. And I'm forgetting one, Krista. I think I've covered most of them actually. So those are the areas that we cover in our assessment. And one of the things like I said, we've learned from our clients. So we've done this assessment quite a few times across the state now and continue to learn and start to see patterns of what our common response is when we get to certain questions. One of the questions that we think about is what do you know about the patterns of your people? So this image here is really meant to think about, we do hiring, right? Whether you're in HR right now, or you are a hiring manager, or you're a superintendent, we've probably all touched the hiring process to some degree. So we hire people, we acquire them, and then we know in the end they either stay or they leave. That's the end of the cycle of an employee life cycle. In the middle, we have that yellow circle that just says, do we hope or do we take action? We do, as employers, lots and lots of things to engage our employees, to make sure that they have a good experience, to support them. I know a couple of weeks ago, there was an informational session all around this, all around retaining your teachers and what are the strategies to improve their well-being while they're working with you. We know that people are talking about this over and over again as it relates to what do employees need in 2024 to be satisfied in their job and to stay there. Because things have changed over the last couple of years, and especially in the last 10 years, what we've seen with workforce kind of patterns. So in that hope or action category, I just would love for you to think about, as we frame this up, what are the things that you do to positively influence the retention of your staff? Not only what do you do, but then how do you know if it's working? And just the question, the overall question of what do you know about the patterns of your people? I want you to think about that as we frame up today, because it's really meant to, you probably have some assumptions. You probably have some thoughts of, well, I know that, for example, we're hearing right now, I know that we're having a really hard time hiring and keeping paraprofessionals. That might be something that's a pattern in your district, that a problem you're trying to solve. That's just an example, but I want you to think about getting away from hope, because we know that hope is not necessarily a method, and what are the actions that you're taking, and not just taking, but what are you measuring? Because what today is all about is, what are you doing? Is it working? And how do you know? Not just about what you're doing, but also who are the people. So we'll talk about different types of people data as well. To get us started, we're actually really early on going to just prime your thinking with a self-reflection. And we're going to break into 2 groups to do this. I will be with one group, Krista will be with another group. This is a self-reflection. It's a Likert scale. We want you to strongly agree to strongly disagree to strongly agree. So whether you've just got a side piece of paper, just somewhere to take notes on what how you feel about these 5 statements, whether you agree or disagree. We're going to break into groups, and I just want you to have a conversation about how you scored yourself and why. So you're going to talk about different ones if you want to talk about one specific one that really resonates with you, but we'll have that conversation just to kind of understand where you're currently at with these statements. There we go. I was trying to come back. I think, can everyone hear me again? We all made it virtually back into this space. Krista, give me a thumbs up. Yep.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. We're back. Well, thank you again for taking the time. I know our group was able to briefly cover all 5 of those statements to some degree, to kind of hear what our current reality is across the participants here. Does anyone, Krista, from your group, want to share, or you can share one takeaway from this self-reflection?
So I know one of the things that was brought up in our room was just how the focus tends to be on some groups and not others, where we might have a better idea of where our teachers are going or what's happening with our teachers than we would on, say, how the new hire experience was for a custodian. It talked about one district was doing stay interviews to try and understand why people stay. And then also kind of highlighting just the need for some additional kind of looking into things in this particular area, just because of, in particular, how much things have changed in districts since COVID and since the pandemic kind of upended everyone's worlds, and then everyone had to try and settle into a different version of normal, as it were.
Yeah. Similar themes on our side too, of just this, some groups, specifically teachers, really, we do a pretty good job of measuring teacher new hire experience, usually coming from a teaching and learning department or from someone who mentors those new teachers, but oftentimes other groups are left out, which is a common theme that we hear across our clients as well. But did hear some things around exit interviews and stay interviews. So thank you for taking that time to just prime your thinking a little bit. And as you know, I was a teacher and many of you probably were teachers. We all know the importance of priming. And now we're going to get into some definitions of just what is people data. And I'm going to turn it over to Krista.
Yeah. So then when we talk about people data, we are talking about something very specific that is, and this is a broad descriptor of a lot of different kinds of data, but really people data just refers to any data points or metrics that you can measure about the people or the humans within your organization. And really, so that can be, we'll get into some of the different types of these in just a couple of minutes here, but this could be anything related to various different processes, whether that's onboarding or things like employee engagement, benefits, all the way down to just employee demographics and what do you know about your people, like who they are as a person. And really the point of gathering this data and measuring this data is so that you can help to tell your district's story and your employees' stories through those numbers. Because ultimately that's truly what people data is. It's telling a story about your district, about your organization. And if there's something that you think is happening, chances are you can verify that that's actually happening or occurring through people data. And things like attrition or retention in particular are really key ways that you can see particularly like what the impact is of a particular initiative that you've put in place or a process that you've developed. People data can help to tell you if it's working or not.
And I heard a great example of this too in my breakout of a district that is conducting or has conducted stay interviews with all of their teachers of color. So again, what got your organization? And I didn't ask that follow-up question, but what got you there was either data or a hunch or a feeling that you needed to do this because for whatever reason you were especially curious why teachers of color choose to stay. So that's a great example that we hear all the time of when we make these kind of broad statements of you are doing this, but the way that we kind of think about it differently and frame it up is hopefully going to help you kind of put some strategy behind it.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk, moving on then to talk about onboarding, and these are just some examples of the kinds of things that you can measure as a result of onboarding. So things like fill time, and that's what we mean by that is how long does it actually take you to fill an open job from the time that you post it all the way through when the person actually shows up at your door and starts working. That can be an indicator of how long does your onboarding process take? Is it taking you a really, really long time to get people in the door once you've identified them? Are you just taking a really long time to get back to applicants? These are different pieces that you can start to understand when you look at how long are our jobs actually open for. Things like the referral source, that's where are you getting your new hires from? Are they all coming in your door through student-teacher partnerships? Are they coming in the door from other districts primarily? Are they coming in from outside of education entirely? It helps you to think about where you might market your positions differently. So if you know that you're getting a lot of teachers coming in brand new from universities, that could be an indicator that you might want to look at marketing more heavily to those universities or targeting student-teacher partnerships with other organizations that you haven't potentially worked with before. Or if your new hires are all coming in from outside the world of education, that might give you an idea of other job boards that you could look at posting positions on. And then the last one that I'll talk about on this slide is this cost per hire idea. And that is not just how much do I pay the person that I've now brought into this new custodian position or food service position. It's all the costs that are around the hiring of that job, including how much time did you have to pay your staff for to do the recruiting, to do the efforts to bring this person in the door, to go through onboarding, for doing new employee orientation. It's really trying to capture what the total cost is of filling a job. So that's the applicant compensation, how much you paid your HR team. Did you spend additional money to put an ad in a different place than you normally would advertise? So say, did you have to pay for a sponsored post on LinkedIn? Did you have to put a job ad out in the newspaper to try and target custodians who might not have access to the internet on a regular basis at home to find out about this job? Different things like that. So all of those costs together give you an idea of what the total cost is of filling a job. And ultimately that's going to have an impact on your finances. And it's like then you can build into your processes going forward.
We asked the question in our assessment around what is your talent acquisition strategy? So what are the different things that you do to acquire talent? And one of the things that I just want you to think about as we talk through this is you can always start small. So when we talk about cost per hire, for example, you might be wanting to know how much it costs you to hire one paraprofessional or one administrator, right? And all those different examples that Krista just gave of where you might be posting, it really puts some numbers around the importance behind talent acquisition and where you want to spend and allocate those funds. So it's just something to really be mindful of because we often aren't thinking about it that holistically. Feel free to, if you're having questions throughout, I know Lori and Dave are monitoring the chat, so you can put some questions in there or just feel free to interrupt. As someone I was just with the other day said, I was a teacher, so I'm used to being interrupted and I handle it very well. So just go ahead and let us know what questions you have throughout. I'm going to move us to another type of people data. And this is a big one that we really do talk a lot about in our assessment process. So employee engagement and retention data. A lot of you in our discussion mentioned new hire surveys and understanding the new hire experience. So when we talk about new hire surveys, there's a couple pieces I really want to highlight. First of all, it shouldn't just be for teachers. So it should be for everybody. And oftentimes what we hear is, oh, well, we're doing a new hire survey at the high school. That high school principal sends one out. Okay, so does the middle school principal, so does the elementary principal, and we have all these different surveys happening, but we're not collecting that information from an HR or a district perspective and really understanding what that data means. So one of the things that we're going to really probably say multiple times today is that you never want to survey and then do nothing with that information, right? We know it's a way to lose trust. We know it's a way to just lose momentum in strategy. So when we think about performing a new hire survey, there's many pieces to that puzzle. It's putting the survey together. What is it that you really want to know? We have examples of new hire information. So for example, did they have received their technology on the first, or did they have their technology? Did they have everything they needed to be successful on their first day of work? Did they know where to put their yogurt and go to the bathroom? Did somebody give them a tour? Do they know where to park? Did somebody offer support? Do you understand your pay? Do you understand what benefits are offered to you, right? We think of those and I actually heard another person say those HR things as being really just kind of checklisty. I would argue that those are really important things to set someone up for success in their new job. And we want to know if we're doing that really well. And it's a team effort. So oftentimes what we hear is this siloed thing of HR handles pay and benefits, and then we hand it off to the principal, and we're not really sure what happens in between there, right? We don't have a cohesive plan of how we handle new hires. And so then when we think about that survey, really framing up, what do you want to know? Sending it out on a regular cadence. So some people can do a 45-day survey, some people do a 90-day survey or both. But when you're really thinking about, you want to have a predictable cadence to this. So for every batch of new hires, depending on the size of your district, you want to consistently be sending that out to every group of new hires. all employee groups across the board. So you're creating questions that are applicable to everybody. And then you're really gathering that data as a leadership team, whether that's, and it's not just HR, right? But it might be HR facilitating it. But then who else in your district office needs to get together? Probably technology, probably teaching and learning, people who are going to be responsible for making those changes as part of the orientation process. Because we also know that the orientation process should include a lot of different people, and it's not just one person's job. So new hire survey, very, very important piece of data, and we can continue to improve our processes through the feedback that we get from our new hires. Most new hires are going to make their decision. Someone in my life always used to say, kids make a decision whether you're a good witch or a bad witch pretty quickly. Employees also make a decision about whether this is a good place to be and I feel valued and taken care of right away. They're going to make that decision. And so asking for their feedback is really important. Exit interviews, a couple of you referenced this as well in the beginning of our session together. So are you consistently collecting exit interview or requesting it or an exit survey with every person that decides to leave your organization? We often hear clients say, well, people only really leave here when they have a life event like a spouse moving or a new job or a new opportunity. What we want to pay attention to are who are the people that are leaving your organization and going to a similar job in a different district, right? And why? Would they wanting that feedback so that you can increase your own awareness of why people are leaving. And I would say that, again, what we hear often is people sometimes do this, but it's not very consistent. Oh, we have done those in the past, or we sometimes do these with certain employees, or I do them when people tell me they want to give an exit interview. Well, usually if that's the case, we know exactly what people are about to say, right? So just think about it really globally as everybody who leaves the organization gets this opportunity to share their feedback. And then we do something with it.
The only caveat that I would add to that is people that you ask to leave your system, probably not the best candidates for an exit interview. So individuals that you have to coach out or you have to remove because of an incident or bad performance or things like that. Generally speaking, I've never recommended sending an exit interview in those cases, only because you know why they're leaving. You asked them to. There's not really much more to learn from that. So this is more targeted towards the people that make the decision on their own to exit your system.
Thank you. Yes. When we talk about key talent, what do we need to measure as it relates to key talent? So when we get into a performance conversation during our assessment, what are the ways that you measure performance and how do you know? And then how do you identify key talent? Who are those people that you want to make sure they stay in your organization, right? You can see, and this kind of leads into the next one, you can see potential for growth and career pathing and promotion patterns. So how do you facilitate maybe stay interviews, which I know somebody mentioned in the breakout room too, to understand, and that was specifically around teachers of color, but maybe you also do stay interviews of, again, key talent in your organization that you want to make sure they feel like they are valued and we don't want them to go anywhere. Promotion patterns, again, what do you know about the career paths of your employees? You can measure that by looking at maybe really long-standing employees and how did they come into the organization? Where did they start? Where are they now? And how have they grown? And what does that tell you about the career pathing opportunities that you provide for your employees? That's a really important piece for many, many people who come into an organization. They want to know, what opportunities do I have ahead of me to grow? That's not everybody, but it's a lot of people that want that, to know that they have opportunities. And so how can you tell that story through numbers? Employee experience. This is generally, we ask the question in our assessment, what patterns do employees have to give and receive feedback, right? And this is just feedback as it relates to general, how are things going? So if you're a superintendent or an HR director, or whatever your title is on this call today, thinking about, do you feel like you have a good pulse of how people are doing in your organization? Maybe you do feel like that because you do things like rounding and informal conversations, and or maybe you do conduct an employee engagement survey. Again, this is really important that we don't send out a survey and then not do anything with the data. So if you're going to do that, and we'll talk about this at the end with some tips, but you want to be prepared to take action on that and also really protect I'll let Krista talk about this a little later, but really protect responses so that people feel comfortable sharing how they actually feel. And a survey isn't the only way that you can gauge what the employee experience is like, but it's really important you understand and that you're able to tell the story through numbers. What is the experience like for all employee groups within your organization? Finally, another one under this category is attendance data. Who are your frequent users of time off and what does that tell you? Oftentimes in a district, sometimes people are paying attention to this, but a lot of times we hear like, oh, well, I just know, because you kind of have a gut feeling because you've been monitoring subs or whatever the reason may be that you have a feeling this person does. But when you really pull the numbers and can kind of see, oh, wow, people in this particular building are taking way more time off than other people. What is that telling you? And what are you doing as a response to that? Chris, anything to add on this slide before I move us on?
I think I would just add that it's important to take a look at that data carefully because your frequent users of time off, it could be based on you have a lot of people in one particular building who are all having to go on leave at the same time because they all happen to be having babies. Or it could also be telling you the story that you might have a principal in that building that is not managing attendance or not checking on staff attendance. So there can be a wide range of whys in there. So it's important to dig a little bit deeper, and we'll talk about that a little bit more about how you could do that a little bit further down. But employee demographics can play a major role in that. But then the next piece that we wanted to talk about here is something called the Employee Net Promoter Score. And I'll start this way, if you've ever been using a system or a tool or gone into somewhere else for a service and you've gotten the question, how likely would you be to recommend X, Y, or Z to a friend or colleague? Or anything that's phrased in that way, that question has been used to calculate what's called a Net Promoter Score. Like you can see on the screen here, it's a metric that commonly gets used to measure that idea of customer satisfaction. Sometimes they call it customer loyalty. And the Employee Net Promoter Score really takes that same principle and just applies it towards the employee experience. And if you take a look at this as one piece of your puzzle, that can give you insight into not just what your culture is like, what your organization is like, but it can also tell you, are people going to be really likely to leave your organization, or are they more likely to stay with your organization? And will they talk positively about your organization to their friends, their neighbors, their family, whoever in their life? And the way that you calculate that, it goes back to that survey statement that I talked about. And it's not always how likely are you to recommend XYZ to a friend or colleague. It can also be phrased, one of the ways that we use that is just a simple statement of, I would recommend, insert district name here as an excellent place to work. And then how people respond to that, whether that's a strongly disagree, strongly agree, positive, negative responses, that's how that score then gets calculated. People who select a negative statement, like a strongly disagree or disagree, they're considered detractors. That's that group of yellow individuals on the left-hand side of your screen. They can really impede your retention efforts. They're less likely to stay with your organization long-term. They can really damage your reputation if they're out in the community saying, oh my gosh, you don't want to work for organization X, Y, or Z. So it's really important to consider this population of employees. On the other hand, those individuals who select either agree or strongly agree, those are considered your promoters. Promoters really help to increase your reputation in the community. They can help to attract new candidates to your jobs because they're more likely to recommend your organization as a place to work when they're talking to their neighbors who are thinking about looking for a new job, or their best friend who's moving into the area. And then they're also more likely just to stay with you long term. Once you have your individuals grouped into this kind of promoter or detractors category, then what you need to do is subtract the percent of responses that were in that detractor group from the percent of promoters. And then that is what gives you your individual Net Promoter Score. It's a number that falls between -100 and +100 at the high end. And really any Net Promoter Score that's higher than 0 indicates that you have more promoters than detractors, and therefore a more positive outlook from your employees on the organization. One other piece that I like to note here, when we're doing a survey, we don't include a neutral statement because frankly, we would like to not give people a particular place to hide. We're looking for honest feedback. And it can be really easy sometimes for people to just pick whatever the neutral option is in the middle, and that doesn't give us really as good of data as we can. So there are sometimes survey questions that will have a neutral response option. And for the purposes of this Net Promoter Score, if you have a neutral option for people to pick from, anyone in that category is considered what we would call a passive, and they don't get included in that Net Promoter Score calculation. Those passive individuals, they really don't harm or help your reputation in any particular way, but they could be what you might consider a flight risk. So meaning that they're not really on one side or the other when it comes to your organization, which means that then if they get an offer from somewhere else, they're probably going to be more likely to take it, just because they don't feel particularly attached to your district as a whole.
And we wanted to just include this. This is a really common practice in private organizations and outside of the education industry. We have yet to really engage with a district that's using this type of measurement really regularly, but you could start by just adding that statement that Krista said is, I would recommend blank district as an excellent place to work as one way to gauge your ENPS and then start to gather that over time. So you might include that statement on a new hire survey, because maybe even after 90 days, they have an opinion on that. Yes, this is an excellent place to work. Our employees after 90 days say this about our district. So I think it's just a tool that's really commonly used, again, for customer satisfaction and loyalty, but also can be used from that employee standpoint. So we just wanted to include some education on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, we have a couple questions in the chat here.
Sure.
And since I interrupted, I'm going to start with my question first.
Great.
That is, do you have any recommendations about how you gather some of that survey data? Is it always anonymous, or do you collect information around that? I have a personal bias against anonymous feedback. I think people need to own their feedback, and yet at the same time, I also want honest feedback, and I know sometimes that's hard. So do you have recommendations about that?
Krista, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I equally have a personal bias against anonymous feedback. One, because anonymous ultimately winds up not being anonymous in some way, shape, or form. I've responded sometimes to surveys that were supposed to be anonymous and then had someone reach out to me afterwards. And that's a really uncomfortable feeling for employees.
Mhm.
So it's something that I think about a lot. I think it's important on one side for people to be able to stand behind their feedback and for you to be able to collect that information so that here's what our teaching staff feel. Here's what our food service staff think about our district, or our childcare staff that serve our kiddos in the before and after school programming that we offer. On the other hand, I think it is really important, and we'll talk about this a little bit further down in this session. I think it's really important to protect that information where you can and to the extent that you can. So it's really thinking about who gets access to the full set of survey responses. So while you may be using the results of an employee engagement survey with your leadership team, I think it's really important to limit the people who can actually see people's individual responses, just to help protect employees. So if they are sharing really candid feedback or potentially negative feedback about a leader or about a building, that then they feel safe to do that without worrying about retaliation. Not that our leaders would ever do that, but it's one of those safeguards that I like to put in place. If you do decide to try and collect data more anonymously, I would still recommend having people identify either what building they're assigned to or what employee group they're a part of, or a combination of both, just that then it gives you a little bit more to go on when you're doing the analysis of any particular results like that.
And I think just to add on, I think the most important part is no matter what you decide, that your communication and language around how responses are used and the why of collecting this information is really important, right? If I'm going to take the time to fill out a survey and provide my feedback, I can't tell you the number of surveys I've started and gotten 30 seconds in and then stopped it, right? Because I think like, oh, I don't even know why I'm doing this, or this seems too long or cumbersome. So really needing to understand why this is important, what my responses are going to be used for, if it's anonymous or not, like just being very clear with your employees, that part of it is really important. Is there another question?
There was, as you think about the net promoter scores and how we might target individuals or groups with high scores if most or all of an organization's surveys are done without collecting that contact information. Do you have a section where respondents can enter their email or information for follow-up, or how would you recommend connecting with those promoter folks or detractors?
Yeah, that's where I really would recommend giving people the option to add their email or to add their information. Sometimes, depending on the tool that you use, your tool might be collecting employee emails anyway as part of the system. So whether that's like a SurveyMonkey or a Google form, it might have their email already tied to it, and you might already have access to it. The other piece, to go back to what I said before, if you're doing it without collecting contact information, another way that you could do that, again, would be to at least have people list out, here's the building that I'm assigned to, or here's the employee group that I'm a part of, so that you can see those patterns of, okay, we have a lot of detractors in our custodian group. So maybe we can do some targeted professional learning with our custodian group, or dig a little bit deeper into what they shared, to see if there is something that we could do that might help to improve that experience for them. I don't know who on the call might have watched Ted Lasso, so I'm just going to give a Ted Lasso reference anyway, but just thinking about sharing employee feedback. In one of the earlier episodes, they passed around a box for people to just put suggestions in. And one of the suggestions that was put in was just, please fix the water pressure. The water pressure is terrible. So it's when you can get information like that, then it gives you something that you can actually do something about, that then improves the experience for those employees. And that might help to turn those detractors into eventual promoters.
Okay. And then third question was around whether or not anyone had a stay interview format, or if you have a format that you recommend. Is that a survey? Is that a one-on-one? How are those done?
Yeah. I think, and Laura, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I just, one of my skills is having information and sharing information. So I like to answer questions. In terms of stay interviews, I think this is going to come down to your individual preference. For me personally, I always prefer to do stay interviews in an in-person format versus doing a survey. If you want to collect this information from a large group of people, then you could look at doing it in a survey type of tool. If you're just trying to understand, okay, what drew you to working for, this particular school district over another one, and then what are the things that make you feel truly valued here that make it easy for you to stay. If you're looking to get that information from a really large group of people, I would do this in a survey tool type of format. But if you are looking just to understand, who on your team do you want to get that feedback from? That's where I would do that in a more one-on-one format, particularly if you are trying to understand why your high performers stay with you. That information it's just much more valuable if you can do that in an in-person format, because then that person also then feels seen and heard and valued in a different way than if they're just responding to a survey tool.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, I think, again, just yourself, imagine someone coming to you and asking you about your experience and taking the time to do that, about your job, hearing how it's going, why do you stay? You're going to feel naturally really valued that someone's even taking the time to do that. I think that that's kind of a lost practice right now. And so anything that can draw you back into relationship with your employees is what we're gonna recommend as a starting point. Great questions. Thank you.
And I saw there was one other question that was in the chat that I'll just address really quick before we move on. I saw there was a question on doing exit interviews with staff who might have been reduced because of budget cuts. I think it's definitely something that you can do an exit interview with that population. The caveat that I would have there is because they didn't necessarily choose to leave, and you didn't necessarily ask them to leave because of performance related reasons. It might just be our district is shrinking and we don't have the same positions that we had before. And so we have to eliminate this role, or we used to have funding for this position and now that special funding went away. So we can no longer pay for it. In those instances, you can ask those individuals for their feedback. And I would just say maybe take those results with a grain of salt, especially if you're doing an exit interview right around the time that they've been told that their position's being eliminated, just because they're probably going to have some stronger feelings. And that's where things that they might not have seen as a negative before they might have a much more negative outlook on it at that point. So then moving on here to talk about employee demographics. Really the point of looking at employee demographics, and a lot of this information is probably already stored within your HR and payroll system or within their application system. So things like your gender, your age, your race or ethnicity, these things are all already stored for you because it's data that we have to collect even as you're entering the organization. And the primary reason for that is for federal and state reporting. So things like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or STAR for your licensed and non-licensed staff. These data points you already have to have. And so I'm not really talking about those metrics in terms of federal and state reporting here. I'm talking about them in terms of what else can these metrics be used for. Really, that tells you primarily about the makeup of your staff and how the makeup of your staff is changing over time. And then that feeds into the rest of your employee experience. So to give an example, if you say have an initiative to continue to diversify your workforce, either by gender or by race or ethnicity, because you want your population of employees to reflect the population of your students more closely, looking at how the racial and ethnic makeup of your staff is changing over time can give you clues as to how well that initiative to diversify your workforce is working. If you are continuing to hire more and more teachers of color, more staff of color for your positions, and so the makeup of your staff is becoming more diverse, that can be an indicator that that initiative is working. On the flip side of that, if you're constantly hiring more staff of color and then they're not staying with you for a long period of time, that's another indicator too, that maybe you're doing a really good job of bringing these people in the door, but then if they don't feel supported while they are there, and then they're not staying with your organization, that can be an indicator too, that maybe that initiative is working in one area, but not so well in another. It can also feed into the types of benefits that you consider offering to your employees. So when we talk about the average age of your staff, that can give you an idea of what types of benefits might be more important to your employees, or where you might need to dig a little bit further. So if your population is, skewing on the younger side, you may have more individuals who are interested in things like a paid parental leave type policy, where I'm more likely to be starting a family, or I'm interested in starting a family, and I'm going to be really interested in being able to have flexible time or a flexible schedule so that I can take time off to be with my family, or to be able to take care of sick kids, or even just to take time off to bond with a newborn child. Or again, on the flip side of that, if the average age of your population is skewing on the older side, they may be more interested in retirement savings and how do I prepare for the end of my career and how is the district going to support me in that. So these are all kind of clues that your employee demographics can shed some light on for you. Things like average education, average total compensation, these things have a big impact on your finances at the end of the day. If your teachers are by and large entering your organization not at the bachelor's lane and not at step one, if they're all coming into your organization with a significant amount of experience or with a significant amount of education, that's going to have an impact on your finances. And it's also going to have an impact on the sorts of things that you bring to the negotiating table. Because that gives you a clue. If your teachers really aren't coming in on those bachelor's lanes, then you might want to put more priority on either increasing pay at the master's lanes for those existing staff, or if you want to target more people coming in on the bachelor's lanes, it could give you an idea of where we might want to look at adjusting that.
Awesome. So those are sort of the three buckets that we've put our people data into. So that onboarding data as it relates to hiring, retention, engagement data, and then demographic data. So I know I'm conscious of time right now as we wrap up, but one of the things is maybe you're thinking right now, we all know that we're on different journeys with our data analytics and collection of people data. So maybe you're in a place where you feel really good after hearing all this information of, yep, we've got this, and we look at it and we use it and we have a system for doing so. Great. You also might be at a place where I have no idea where to start. And we want to just provide you with some guidelines of where you might start. So the first question to ask is, what do you want to know about your people? We gave a ton of examples today, and maybe you are feeling, again, it usually starts with some sort of gut feeling of, I want to know. Maybe you don't do a new hire survey right now and you really want to know what that experience is like for all employee groups, or you do that new hire survey with teachers, but you don't do it with all employee groups. So you're going to start there. Or I want to know what the experience, or I want to know why our teachers in the first 5 years are leaving. I want to know what benefits are working for our people. All these different things. What do you want to know about your people? Then you want to go to what data do you already have? Like Krista alluded to, you probably do. And someone in our small group in the beginning said, I'm pretty sure Frontline has this information. Yes, Frontline and your HRIS and payroll system is going to have a lot of data. The question that we always hear is, but how do I have the time to do that or the capacity to do that? It's a prioritization thing, right? We have to think about who, and this gets down to the organizational partnership, but having a data guru, which is Krista, when she was in the organization, was that person. She was the one who could pull that data, put it into a place that visualized it and made it all make sense to other people that needed to understand the results. You do need that, and not every organization naturally has that. However, there's ways to get there. So looking at what data do you already have, what data do you need to collect? So maybe you do have demographic data, but you don't have much feedback from your employees. So that would be something you would need to go collect. When we talk about organizational partnership, we want to think about this as, and I started the session saying it's not just an HR thing, but maybe you have somebody in your tech department who's really good at this, right? And that you want to tap their shoulder and say, here's the information I think we need about our employees. Can you help? How does this look? And how might we be able to get the right people in the room to really partner around pulling this information together so that we can make decisions? And then communication to staff, and we kind of alluded to this already, is really important. You want to be transparent about your process. You need that employee buy-in so that they understand the why, so that they fully participate. And if you're collecting data that way, and you just want to communicate, again, the why. We have that little image of, oftentimes you just want to start small. You just begin, you gather that feedback, you refine the process, and you keep going. A couple of tips as we wrap up. I'm going to turn it back to Krista just so she can reiterate some of these points, and then we will send you off.
Yeah. So Laura already said it's really important that you start by explaining your why, because employees will want to know. If all of a sudden you start sending out surveys asking for their feedback, they're going to say, well, why are you asking me? Why do you want to know? So it's really important to be clear about what you want to accomplish with this survey, and also then what you plan to do with those results. And like Laura alluded to and said a couple of times earlier in the session, the worst thing that you can do is to ask for employee feedback and then do nothing with it. If they give you feedback, that means that they are interested, they are invested. And then if you don't do anything with those results and you don't communicate about it, the survey just kind of sits there and it collects dust, either on someone's shelf or in somebody's electronic drives, electronic dust, I guess. Employees then are going to remember that. And then the next time you go around and ask for responses or for feedback and have them fill out a survey, they will be less likely to respond to that survey, less likely to engage. So it's really important that you tell them clearly what we're going to do, and we're committed to taking action on this, which might mean that before you start doing this, you start with your leadership team so that they know we're going to be doing this. And then we're all agreeing to, here's what we are going to do with the information once we have it. We talked before about protecting those individual responses just so that then you get the most candid feedback that you can from employees, knowing that employees will always filter that feedback, especially if you're sending out a survey from yourselves internally. This is one reason why organizations sometimes choose to partner with a third party to do surveys like this, so that employees feel a little bit more protected, a little bit more safe in terms of sharing honest feedback. And then the last tip that I'll leave you with there is it's really important to not just consider this a one and done, particularly with some of those metrics that we talked about earlier. If you want to truly understand the impact of initiatives that you have or particular processes that you're implementing, it's important to do measurements like this over time so that you can get an idea of not just what was the makeup of our staff at this one point, but how is it changing and what does that trend tell us?
So to finish, again, we encourage you to make your own action plan using those steps. So what do you want to know? What do you already know? What do you need to collect? Who can help you? And then how do you start? Following those steps, I know that we're sharing our slides with you at the end. So we're hoping that this, and I know you're not all superintendents, but as superintendents, as district leaders of any kind, how has your thinking changed about people data? What's one next action you might take? I just want to leave you with those thoughts and knowing that everyone's got to get on with their day, but we really thank you. There's more resources at the end of this presentation, and we just really thank you for your time today. Those resources are just two, not an all-encompassing list, but you can reach out to us, either one of us, by email if you're wanting any more information. But thank you so much, and thank you, Lori and Dave.
Thank you so much to Laura and Krista. We look forward. I'll speak for myself. I look forward to our next session together. I've taken lots of notes, so thanks for starting the conversation.
Yeah, we will be back in a couple of weeks around taking care of your people. So thanks so much.
Bye.
You all.